Morning and welcome to JAK News. I'm Abby and the topic up for discussion today is citizen protest.
Citizen protests are becoming increasingly more relevant in today's times. Partly fueled by social media, demonstrations have arisen over Trump administration policies on such issues as healthcare, climate change, and immigration. Many protests have arisen, with many even becoming violent in some cases. The size of today's citizens' protests are steadily growing. Protests are expanding to all areas of the United States, including public spaces, major highways, and college campuses. Many people use the First Amendment to justify the protest. The First Amendment to the Constitution gave the rights to free speech and freedom of assembly and the right to petition to the government. Some protest movements are hugely influential during the 19th and 20th centuries, including the abolitionist movement against slavery and the labor movement's effort to outlaw child labor. Although protests can certainly be influential in nature, recently they have been met with resistance from government authorities. Over the past 2 years, there have been many anti-Trump administration protests across the nation. These protests resulted in lawmakers in nearly 20 states introducing bills in 2017 designed to impose new regulations and penalties on protests. Many people question as to whether these bills are necessary to prevent violent behavior or if they take away the rights presented by the First Amendment. Today, we have Josh Anello and Kayla Meyer, both here to speak their opinions on these issues. Good morning.
Good morning, Abby. I'm advocating against citizen protest. Although citizen protests have the potential to result in policy change, they often result in violence and chaos. Disruptive protests create chaos which can easily rapidly devolve into riots. For example, in July of 2016, a protest that shut down Interstate 94 was marked by smoke bombs, fireworks, jagged rocks, and broken bottles. Breaking the law and resorting to violence is not an effective way to petition the government, and inflicting harm on law enforcement is not an effective way to persuade the public to sympathize with your cause. Critics have asserted that this proposal is somehow unconstitutional, but they have little evidence to back this up. I believe that it's the public right to safety and reliable transportation is more important than the right to petition. Although it's important for people's voices to be heard, safety is the top priority.
I wholeheartedly disagree with Josh. I am advocating for citizen protests. Many citizen protests have proved to be effective throughout history in making policy changes. An example of this is the protests which occurred during the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement's success using nonviolent protests influenced campaigns and resulted in policy changes. Although some protests are violent, many are nonviolent. By protesting, people allow their voices to be heard. Advocating against citizen protests is advocating against our constitutional rights, specifically the First Amendment. Introducing bills against citizen protests silences political opponents and limits the effectiveness of peaceful protest. In the current era, with only one party in control of Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, and the vast majority of state houses, public protest is one of the few avenues left for citizens who want to voice opposition to policy choices. Taking away our right to protest would be the equivalent to drawing a line through the First Amendment with a permanent marker.
All right. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you for watching JAK News. See you. Bye. Someone call the police.